Okay, this is the EWG and Windows Working Group report out panel. So we'll go through a brief description of the goals and charter of our working groups, and then we'll go into specifics for both the Linux and the Windows, and we'll talk about how to contribute. Okay, so primarily the EWG and the Windows Working Group have the same goals. One is for Linux and one is for Windows, and that's to develop the the Open Fabrics enterprise distribution. And really what that is it's a hardening and testing of the code base. We develop the code in an open source with an open source process. We submit patches to a list, we review them, then we send stuff upstream to kernel.org, it gets reviewed. And that's for the kernel pieces. And the same happens for the user mode pieces. But then we need a mechanism, or we decided when we formed these groups that we needed a mechanism so that we could package all this stuff up together, test it all together, and release it as a coherent entity. The other big things that we do on the Linux side is that even though we developed the code initially for the upstream kernel, half of the user base, or 90% of the user base, doesn't run that. They run Linux distributions from the distros that are older kernels. The EWG does a lot of backporting to a lot of different kernels. So we do the validation and testing and hardening of the code, and then we put it together in a software package with release notes so that it can be easily installed. And of course, I know a lot of people have a lot of complaints about our packaging and installation, but we at this point don't have a better solution to the problem and still meet all the goals that we want to get done. And then we do the problem or the bug tracking and problem resolution through these working groups. So I'll turn it now over to support, who will go through the EWG and the OFED Linux status update and futures.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So maybe OFED is not the best thing, and I know there are complaints, but at least this is what we have for now, and being used, I guess, by many customers. So in general, I'll try to do it short because I know we are behind time, about what we did from last year, which is all the OFED 1.5x, and then what are plans for OFED 1.6, which may be more interesting. So I'll not read everything here. Everybody that is taking part in EWG and read our EWG mailing list, which is actually used and people use it, knows all the details. So actually, about a year ago, we just did OFED 1.5.1, and during 2010, all we did is actually only upgrade of the 1.5 and used this as a base for our more and more releases. And we added the features, updated packages, and sometimes even removed packages like old stuff. So this is 1.5.1. Then on September, we did the 1.5.2, and actually this was also the last release that support RedHat 4x. We do not support it anymore, and I put here the list of the main new features, which I'm not going to read now. And only about a month ago, we just did the 1.5.3. We added more operating systems, more user space library, and actually one nice new feature that just came is a raw Ethernet QP, actually to enable use user space for Ethernet QP, which can enable open various new applications to be used not only in InfiniBand. So this actually was what we had till now. And I think what maybe most people interested is what's the future. So this is actually the first schedule that we have now for OFED 1.6. We already started the work of having the new tree. Usually when we move a new number from 1.5 to 1.6, it means that we are changing kernel base and we have to do all the backports again, and this is a huge work actually. But without it, we don't have anything that's supporting the distros. This is why it's so important. So our target is to have the first RC around middle of June, and then we'll have RCs every about 2 weeks. These are a usual process. And according to past experience, it's taking about 3 months to get it for GA. So this is the schedule. So what we're going to be, that will be there. So first we are going to jump kernel base. OFED 1.5x was based on kernel 2.630, and we are going now to move to 2.638. Decision of the previous conference last year was that we will remove the MPI packages from OFED. We at EWG will agree about which version we are testing, because one of the ideas is to have testing, but there was a request here that MPI will not be part of OFED anymore, and we are going to actually to do it. We will support latest open all the distros, and actually we wish to drop here the support of /10, which is a quite old kernel, and I hope this is there is no objection. Of course, we'll also send this in the mailing list, because maybe not everybody participating here. We want to add the new speed, the FDR. There is a work done to have FMRs supported also for user space. Currently, it's only in kernel.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And also we want to add APM support for the CMA. This is to help things like, for instance, SDP to do failover. Other thing that is important, actually someone talked here about SRIOV before, so we want to add SRIOV, at least for in Mellanox hardware. This is going to be supported with ConnectX 2 and 3 that coming, and we will support it using KVM, which is a Linux standard for SRIOV. NFS-RDMA will be supported again with Red Hat TL6 and /11. Actually, NFS-RDMA is part of OFED all the time, but it's not in the latest 1.5.3 and the 2 releases. We removed it from the default installation since there was no its beta quality was not good enough and it can do harm. So I hope this time, I know Jeff is trying to do his best here to bring it back to life. So I hope it will succeed. There are going to be a few improvements in OpenSM, like 3D Torus, performance manager improvements, more port balancing options for routing, also SRIOV support. There is a need to change something, and more things regarding the extending link speed support. And of course, if there are new hardware, at least this is at least Chelsea and Mellanox already known. Maybe other companies going also to have new hardware. Of course, if there are going to be more new low-level driver support, it will be there. So this is the list we have for now for the 1.6. And if there will be more new feature from till now, till we have the first release candidate, of course, we will welcome them. If you have any question before we move to Windows, or yes.
Just curious, what's the process for the features being added? Is it just things that have landed and submitted, or you guys look at what's out there possible?
So actually, we are discussing it. We have bi-weekly EWG meeting, and when we start to have a new release, we send it to the list, and the companies, each company saying what is the interest for it to develop. And for instance, if I don't know, I can take Mellanox as an example because I'm from Mellanox. If we are interested in developing SRIOV, that we will add it. But you know, some other company may be interested in developing the user space FMR. So they say, we are going to contribute this, and we put all together. Same also for the operating systems. In general, in the operating systems, the distros, we support the latest two for each, you know, Novell or Red Hat. So it does, you know, everybody's, if they're in open fabrics, they can participate in the EWG and the influence on what's going in there. Okay, so I'll move it to Windows.
Hello, my name is Eric, and this is Uri. I work for Microsoft, and Uri is a Mellanox developer who I terrorize regularly. We've got a little bit of information here about the current version of the driver set and what features are out there. A little bit of information about what's coming, what we've done with that driver, and then a comment or two on manageability and some of the things that we're trying to do to improve that. The current OFED for Windows driver is 2.3. It was released turn of the year, give or take. You can see it supports a bunch of different OS versions. Something I want to point out here, what we call this is logo tested source. It's not logo signed drivers. In Windows, there's this concept of signing driver binaries and surfacing to an administrator when they install a driver, whether or not that driver has been signed. And many of the admins and their bosses have policies against installing unsigned drivers. And there's a pretty scary looking dialog box that pops up to reinforce that, of course. The way that the logo program is set up, a binary goes along with a piece of hardware. So the Open Fabrics Alliance is in the unusual position of having a driver and yet no particular hardware that it goes with. It goes with many pieces of hardware. So what we do is as we get close RC and we get close to an RC of the driver set, we bring that into Microsoft and we run through, well, a set of tests that we distribute for logo to the vendors, which is usually already done by the time we get it. But we also do a set of logo verification tests on the drivers, on the built drivers, covering the API itself. The Network Direct API is the RDMA interface in Windows. MPI level, there are something like 4,000 different MPI tests that we run over it. And then a set of standard benchmarks, you know, the simulated benchmark kind of things, Palace and LinPack and those. And then real commercial applications running benchmark problems at scale on a cluster. And we do all of that every time we turn the crank and come up with a new RC or a new major version as we're solidifying to a release for OFED. So we take the stability of those drivers very seriously and do exactly as much diligence on those as we would on a submission by a vendor for a particular piece of hardware. And in fact, doing that diligence makes the rest of the engagements with the individual hardware vendors more productive. So it's a win-win. The networking interface in Windows for the drivers is called NDIS. The core Windows networking team makes new versions of NDIS regularly, much to the delight of the hardware community. And so it seems like we're always chasing the latest NDIS release versions. These are the current version set that we're at. We're slightly behind and working to catch up. As I mentioned, Network Direct is the RDMA provider that's used in, or not RDMA interface that's used on Windows. It's fabric agnostic. It was designed to be a very thin layer over the IB verbs and iWarp interfaces and others. The idea is that, and both for both internally in Microsoft feature teams as well as Windows customers, this is the route by which they can write once, use on many different network cards. Our friends at Intel decided to do something that was especially useful in this release, which was to add a library when we were looking at all these diagnostics, because that's a big problem as we go into commercial environments where the administrators are not IB experts. As we go in, we need to have more and better diagnostics, and I'll talk about that in a moment. One way to get there is to get there fast is to move all of the existing Linux diagnostics, the command line stuff, into the Windows distribution so that it runs well. And with this one fell swoop of putting the verbs library interface in, we've been able to do that. And we picked up not quite all of them, but a lot of them in this 2.3 release. There is a DAPL interface as well, UDAPL interface that ships with 2.3. A bunch of bug fixes from customer and in-house ones that we found. We're a little behind on our SM. It used to be way behind the Linux SM, and now it's pretty close. We're getting there. We're based on 3.3.6 for this drop. And then lastly, the way that the installer ties into installation on a Windows box, whether that's through imaging kinds of technology, or whether that's through script-based stuff, or whether that's with Microsoft Update, or all of the different installation mechanisms, can be tied into by having these two different installer methods, which we cover in 2.3, an MSI package and then an INF-based installer for driver injection. So 2.3 has been out for a bit. What have we done with it? Well, it's working pretty well. We've been able to get 90% cluster efficiencies at reasonable scales, 512 cores, with some Nehalem boxes. We've taken that to the top 500. 5 for the Windows machines that are in the top 100, I should say, all used WinOFED derived drivers, if not rock stock WinOFED drivers. At Tokyo Institute of Technology on Tsubame 2, we broke the petaflop barrier with Windows for the first time. That was with the current OFED driver, WinOFED driver. Interestingly enough, that was one of 7 machines that broke a petaflop. Interestingly enough, you may have noticed that GPUs are becoming table stakes in all this. We have the good fortune of having Kazushige Goto and Laurent Visconti of our numerics team. Dr. Goto came from TAC. You may have heard of him. He's somewhat famous for tuning binaries for different architectures. And he and Laurent worked very hard on a hybrid version of XHPL that used MPI between nodes and leverages GPUs on the nodes. Which brings up a whole interesting topic of GPU use and how that's starting to impact our customers. Although it does seem kind of early. One of the things I'm interested in listening in tomorrow and getting more information from the folks in general and just to the hallways is how many folks have something besides LinPack running on their GPUs. And then we also did reasonably well. We got a couple of machines into the top 5 of the Green 500. Power efficiency is very important in the data center, thus it's very important to the Windows OS, and we were able to come through on a couple of these clusters. Now the next release will be OFED for Windows 3.0. We think that the date's going to be something like freezing in Q2, which is very close. The working feature list is described here. I'm not going to go through each one in particular. If you're interested in Windows drivers and you don't see something on here that should be, I'm hoping you'll come talk to Uri and I or hit the mailing list. One thing that you don't see on here, and something we continue to grapple with, is how we do better management or easier management of InfiniBand network. And just as an example, not to get all product-y on you, but just as an example of something to think about and something I'd love to have some feedback on, is a diagnostics framework that's in the HPC server product. The diagnostic framework has a set of built-in diagnostics, but they can be augmented with vendor plugins. There's a history that's given of all the diagnostic runs that have been made and their results and a pass-fail on them. And then you can get results displayed that come up in an HTML page. The framework includes some infrastructure to send executables out to the compute nodes, run those executables, retrieve results, compile them, and create an HTML output so that each of the vendors doesn't have to write all that all themselves. With that as a backdrop, one of the very first diagnostic tests, in fact maybe the first one that we've published, is one to do network troubleshooting. It is the first specifically IB-aware piece of software that Microsoft has published. It's available at no cost at Microsoft.com download site. Its claim to fame is that it does cluster-wide performance and configuration consistency checking. One of the things that seems simple, but biggest cause of headache and heartache for our customers are inconsistencies in firmware or in driver settings out on the compute nodes. And when I say driver, I mean environment variables or whatever controls your drivers, registry keys, versions of the driver, that sort of thing. What this particular little tool does is to create a report that specifically highlights, that's designed to identify the different subnets, whether or not they happen to be functional at the moment, as long as one of them is, identify the different subnets on the cluster, and identify for those subnets differences in the settings or performance they're achieving and on the different nodes, and then display that. Important distinction here. This is not IB diag. This is not a dump of what the subnet manager knows. There are tools to get that. I would maybe argue that the tools could be more usable than they are. But one of the tools that's lacking is there's no way to go out and see how the HCAs are configured and what version of firmware is out there, et cetera, across all of them easily in a given cluster. And especially with larger clusters, it becomes a real problem. We've got about 300 downloads in the first 3 months, so it's doing okay considering we haven't gone further than a blog posting to publicize it. But the point is that this is a Microsoft attempt at being able to more easily identify problems on an IB subnet, and what it doesn't do is then lead the user to correct them. That's kind of the second half of the problem. And while I think we've talked about wiki pages and better documentation and folks to answer questions, those are all good and required things of a commercial product. But something we haven't talked about is then how do we go fix them at scale without disturbing the the operation of the cluster. So there's a whole set of these usability things that stand in the way of adoption in a data center. And one of the things that conversations that we want to have in the Windows Working Group is how to make that better, how to address some of that. And it sounds like that's something that maybe would be worthy of a broader discussion. I'm not quite sure of the right format or forum for it, but for what it's worth, an example of a problem, our hacked up solution, and illustrating the need for us to do better there. Now, if you want to help with coding of any kind, I'd love to turn this over to our top proponent of community involvement, Woody, to go through these points here.
Help! Any questions? No. So yeah, I mean, we can use more help. You know, everybody, we talk about a lot of things that could be done to help the community. Things like you know, getting the wikis up to date. I know Stan spent a lot of time getting the wiki for the Windows moved over. When we moved to the new website on the Linux side, I said, God, don't even bother bringing that Linux wiki over. It is so bad and out of date. It just leads people down a rat hole, and nobody has time to maintain it. But if we want to start a new one, you know, maybe we should start one from scratch. We could use help on that. But in general, the email lists that we work through, there's 3 of them. One is specific for Windows, the OFW list, the EWG list for the Enterprise Working Group meetings and discussions, and then the Linux General list is where we do work that's essentially going eventually upstream through Roland, and that's actually hosted on kernel.org by Roland. You can, if you're a member, you can participate in, you know, the EWG or WWG meetings, subscribe to the list, and support sends out, and Stan sends out notices when the meetings are going to happen, and the dial-in numbers if people want to participate. And then there's also the Bugzilla system for logging bugs. You can also send notes to the actual maintainers on the list, but we do suggest you also try to log a bug in Bugzilla, because we do, as we're going through each of the RCs and getting towards the end of a release, we review those and try to get the blocker bugs and the high priority bugs fixed before we make a release. Questions?